على قلوب أقفالها صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوا على محمد وعلى محمد. I begin by reminding all of us to foster taqwa within ourselves, to fear God, to always think of His pleasure and displeasure, and let that be the guiding light in our lives. In the Quran, in Surah Muhammad, Allah admonishes us towards the Quran and asks this rhetorical question: do the people not reflect on the Quran? أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ. Right? Tadabbur, this is a word that we should be familiar with, reflecting on, pondering on, reading with care, thinking about what we're reading, understanding it. What are the consequences of what I'm reading? What is a deep understanding? So kind of engaging with text in a meaningful way is tadabbur. Will they not reflect on the Quran? And the alternative to this, if you don't reflect on the Quran, then the other side of it is your heart is locked. Ala qulubin aqfaluha. Qufl, locks are on their hearts. So it's one or the other. Either your heart's locked and sealed, no interest, no curiosity, no humility. I don't need to learn, I don't need to know, I need to change. Your state's that. Or all the other alternative is to open your heart and read the Quran and reflect on it and ponder it. Right, these are our options. So obviously we don't want the latter. We don't want to lock our own hearts. We don't want Allah, taba Allahu ala qulubi. We don't want Him to seal our hearts because we've already decided to seal them for us, for ourselves. And so the alternative is only to read and do tadabbur, reflect on the Quran. So this is a constant message that Islam gives us, the Quran, Ahlul Bayt are always giving us. We also, as those who are teaching you, we're always talking about this. I wanted to share some maybe practical steps, small, incremental, manageable steps that I think will help. If you take these seriously, they will help us to engage with the Quran in a more meaningful way. Now, yes, we can talk about big things, like read the Quran cover to cover, with commentary, take a course on Quran from beginning to end, learn Arabic. Like all those big things can happen, and those are ideals. You should all aim for those if you can, if you have the time and the capacity to do that. Wonderful. But even at a smaller level, day-to-day basis, someone who's not engaged with this in a full-time level, but wants to engage with the Quran meaningfully, there are things that we can do to make our tadabbur the way that we engage with the Quran. So let me start by quoting this verse that we have from Surah Al-Jum'ah. I mentioned this the other night in one of the lectures. I want to repeat the same sentiment. This Surah Al-Jum'ah, which we recite every week, this is speaking about the situation of the Israelite community and some hypocrisies that they had in themselves. So one of the verses he mentions, which really we need to don't take it as a pointing fingers at the Israelites, that they are like this. Allah is mentioning it because we might be like this, so we want to avoid being like this. He says, مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ حُمِّلُوا التَّوْرَاةَ ثُمَّ لَمْ يَحْمِلُوهَا كَمَثَلِ الْحِمَارِ يَحْمِلُ أَسْفَارًا. Those who were made to bear the Torah. Let's say, replace Torah with the scripture of God, the book of God. Those who were made to bear the book of God. ثُمَّ لَمْ يَحْمِلُوهَا. This thumma, technically, the first meaning that comes to mind is they were made to bear it and then they didn't bear it. Which, if you just look at that in isolation and no context, you might think, well, maybe they memorized it and then they forgot it. Or maybe at one stage of their life they used to read it and then one stage of their life they left it off. But this thumma actually in Arabic it's for istib'ad. They were made to bear it despite the fact that Allah, in all His kindness and mercy, He wanted to guide them. He gave them this great gift. Despite that, lam yahmiluha. They didn't willingly carry the burden that they were being given. They were being given a burden, but not a burden that's difficult, a burden that's a gift. Despite that, ثُمَّ لَمْ يَحْمِلُوهَا, they refused to carry it. So it's not that they memorized and forgot or carried it well and then didn't carry it. They didn't carry it at all. They said, we don't want this gift. They were ungrateful for the gift of God. So they still carry it in a way, but they don't carry it meaningfully. And what does he say they're like? كَمَثَلِ الْحِمَارِ يَحْمِلُ أَسْفَارًا. They're like donkeys who carry a big stack of books. A donkey carrying books benefits, it doesn't matter if it's books or bricks or a sack of wheat. It doesn't matter what's on the back of the donkey. It makes no difference to it. It's only the weight that it's carrying. But what is the thing that it's carrying? What's the use or no use? If it's a useful product, if it's a not useful product, it doesn't make any difference. It's been put on its back and it carries based on how it's been trained. So Allah likens people who have this gift of God and don't make use of it, who don't appreciate it, to donkeys. I know in Urdu and Farsi, khar, gadha, these are words that are bad and like kind of sometimes they're used as swear words or as insults for people. In Arabic, it doesn't have quite as bad a connotation. You'd use it as an insult for somebody. And we should take it in the worst way you can think of. Take it in your own language. Do you want to be that? Do you want Allah to liken you as a Muslim who has been given the gift of Quran? Do you want to be a donkey who has no more benefit from that than that he's carrying it around? For us, we don't carry it with us. We put it on our bookshelf. We own it. We have beautiful copies. We're given in marriage, for instance, and now they're collecting dust on a top shelf. Very decorative, very beautiful. But we're not engaging with them. The pages are not worn. There are no marks in it to show where you've read and where you've marked something. No underlining, nothing in the margins that you reflected on something. Right? It's pristine. The way it was 20, 30, 50 years ago when you got it, it's still like that. Right? That's the modern donkey who has books but puts them up on the bookshelf. Maybe doesn't carry it on his back but puts it on the bookshelf. All right, so we don't want to be like that. كَمَثَلِ الْحِمَارِ يَحْمِلُ أَسْفَارًا. And then he goes on, بِئْسَ مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ كَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِ اللَّهِ. What's the pathway if you become this donkey? You might say, well, the worst is I have it on the bookshelf. At least it's on the bookshelf. It's not in the garbage. I'm not rejecting it. At least I have it in my house. But the pathway that you're on, if this is how you treat the trajectory, God has given you an amazing gift, the most valuable gift possible, and you're keeping it on the bookshelf and not using it, not engaging with it, you're on a trajectory towards takveeb. بِئْسَ مَثَلُ الْقَوْمِ الَّذِينَ كَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِ اللَّهِ. Right? If you do this, then from ingratitude, lack of value for that blessing God has given you, you're getting to the point where you're actually going to reject that and say, well, I haven't needed it for these 20 years. What's the point of that book? I can live a perfectly good life without this. I don't need it. Who needs the book of God? So now I've rejected it. Takveeb, I'm mukadhib, I'm calling it falsehood, or at least irrelevant to my life, and I'm going to reject it. وَاللَّهُ لَا يَهْدِي الْقَوْمَ الظَّالِمِينَ. And once you've gotten in this path, then there's no more guidance for you. Allah guides those who are willing. Right? Like us, if I do a favor for you and you are receptive to the favor, that encourages me to do more favor for you. If I do favor to you and you are ungrateful for the favor, if you throw it back in my face, then next time I'm going to think twice before doing the favor. Depending how generous and how patient I am, maybe I'll give a couple more tries, but eventually I'll probably stop and I'll take my favor somewhere else. Allah is the same way. That's His sunnah as well. Once we reject the favors, then He will withdraw them, and that hidayah that He gave us in the form of these books, if we don't appreciate them, then He will take them away. He won't literally take the book away because it's there, but He will take the guidance. It will no longer be light for us that we will be able to benefit from. That لَإِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ is one part that we focus on. وَلَئِن كَفَرْتُمْ إِنَّ عَذَابِي لَشَدِيدٌ. That's what this is talking about. If you are ungrateful for the blessing that God gives you, then first He will take away the blessing, and in the end, because you were ungrateful, you rejected the blessing, He will punish you, and His punishment is severe. Right, so these are the options. Either you have a seal on your heart's locked, أَمْ عَلَى قُلُوبٍ أَقْفَالُهَا, or if not, then prove it by engaging with the Quran through tadabbur. أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ. If we don't do tadabbur, if we don't engage with it meaningfully, then He's calling us donkeys. Senseless beasts who bear a burden that they don't realize the value of. And eventually that pathway leads to takdeeb, not only ingratitude for the gift of God, but now rejection of the gift of God. And now I've sealed my heart. There's no more capacity in me for receiving guidance, and Allah will not bother guiding me anymore. So that's how dire this is. This is how important it is that we have to take this seriously. And it can't be on my bucket list that inshallah once I'm retired then maybe I'll read the Quran. But right now I'm too busy with important stuff. Right? Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So a couple of practical easy steps. One, I've mentioned a little bit in the evening talks as well. So oftentimes you'll notice that ulama, when they give a lecture, when they give a majlis, they will oftentimes focus it, peg it on a verse of Quran. We are also trying to receive guidance from the Quran, and all of the ideas that we believe in, that we're trying to teach to you, are also tied to verses of the Quran. For me today it was أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ أَمْ عَلَى قُلُوبٍ أَقْفَالُهَا. That was my peg, that was my main kind of theme that this whole khutbah is based on. Right? So typically that's the case. They usually mention it right in the beginning. أَمَّا بَعْدْ فَقَدْ قَالَ اللَّهُ, and then they quote the verse. That's the formula, and it's not just a ta'abbud, it's just like something you do as a tradition. This is meaningful. This is the way the Prophet and the Imams have taught us. This is how they would give speeches. And we're also following in their footsteps. My point is, that verse is a verse that you should memorize. Now you have a whole speech focused on one little verse. And oftentimes the lecturer will keep repeating that verse over and over again. They will explain it in some detail, they will use the words, and they will talk about that verse. For a whole hour you have a whole tafsir of that verse. That's a wonderful opportunity to engage with that verse, especially now you have the facility. I don't encourage you to be on your phones in a distracting way, but in a very useful way. You can use your phone. If you're very careful, you can use your phone in very useful ways. And so your phone app that has the Quran on it, pull it up quickly. And as the lecturer is reciting the verse, just pull it up, just have the verse there so you can read it. As every time he says it, you can read it and you memorize it. You're not distracting yourself. You're not going off and reading other things and getting distracted by other parts of it. You've got to be focused. Just read the verse. If you have mushaf, that's even better, but it's harder to carry a mushaf around. At least we have our phones, and that's an easy way to access the verse. So as an example, I did this. Like the last couple of months, Sheikh Faizi was going through the commentary of Surah Al-Hujurat. So every Jum'ah, he would recite one or two verses. And so I had the phone open. I memorized Surah Al-Hujurat as he was reciting it, as he was doing commentary. Yeah, so he's talking about it, he's repeating it, he's giving different ideas, and every time he would mention it, I'd look at the verse and repeat it, and I got the whole surah memorized like that. Yeah? So it's very easy, very practical. Again, you're already engaged, you're already listening to Jum'ah Khutbahs, you're already listening to majalis, you're maybe even online, you're listening to the lectures. So you're already doing something, but now instead of just passively listening and maybe not retaining too much, focus on that which is the focus of that lecture and use that as an opportunity to memorize and take one step towards memorizing the 6,000 verses of the Quran. You memorize one verse. And just imagine how many lectures you listen to, how many verses are mentioned in those. I'm not saying maybe every verse, maybe one lecture contains 20, 30 verses because he mentions many different examples, but there's one that's the focus usually. So focus on that one. That's one tip. Another is, memorizing Quran is there's a mental block that many people have, that, this is too hard. And this is not, the tradition of the Ahlul Bayt or followers of Ahlul Bayt. We have that wrong idea. This is not the case. It's something they did, they encouraged, their companions were very much like that. Our ulama are very much steeped in the Quran. I've been going through some of the commentary of Ayatul Jawadi Amuli. I attended his lectures of tafsir while I was in Qum as well. The way he talks, every sentence is Quran. Every single sentence, it's a Farsi version of the Quran, and he weaves Quran, Farsi, Hafiz poetry, and it's all Quran as he talks. He's so steeped in it, and that's how he thinks, that's how his being is, and that's how he talks and teaches. So our ulama are also very much steeped in the Quran and memorization of the Quran, but for some reason, regular Shia, they feel like, no, this is something that maybe Ahlul Sunnah, they do, but we don't have to do it. Or we sometimes use the cop-out that, oh no, we focus on more important things. We look at the tafsir and the true understanding of the Quran, we don't need to memorize it. They're not mutually exclusive. Memorizing is an important thing. There's so much praise for it. But fine, memorizing the entire Quran, that's one of those big bucket list things that only some people will have the tawfiq to do. But what I'm talking about is piecemeal. Memorizing things that are relevant. So just now I mentioned that one verse at the beginning of a speech, but then there are other verses that are constantly repeated by ulama. You constantly read about them. They're important verses that are always mentioned for aqeedah or for certain akhlaqi points or certain fiqhi points, but you always hear them. So highlight those verses. As you're reading Quran, now inshallah you're engaged in one cycle of the Quran. So as you're reading, make note of those. That, oh, this verse on this page, this is familiar, I've heard it so many times. Well, if you've heard it so many times, that means that it's an important verse that is the foundation of some important beliefs and akhlaq and history and these different things. That's a verse that you should memorize. Just that one verse. Not the whole surah from beginning to end, just that one verse, because it's so often repeated by ulama who are trying to connect you to the Quran. Take that as a good hint that this is an important verse to memorize. You've already heard it 10 times, so it's easy, it's already in your head, you recognized it when you read it, so that you're already halfway there to memorizing. Probably reading it a couple of times, closing your eyes, checking, going back, you'll probably have it memorized. It's a very small step, but that makes a big difference. Now when you're talking about that idea, you don't have to say, there's some verse somewhere in the Quran. You've actually read it, you know it. You may not always have it, you have to sometimes, memorization takes some review. Right? So maybe next time you just remember some of it, but you don't remember the rest of it, so you have to look it up again, and then you fix it and you get the rest of it. But at least now you're grounded in a verse. Oftentimes people will come ask me a question and say, isn't there a verse in the Quran? And they'll mention something that's clearly not in the Quran. It's from a hadith or something that they heard, and they'll say, there's a verse in the Quran that says such and such. There's no verse in the Quran like that. But because they haven't read Quran and they're not familiar with Quran, they don't know what's in Quran, what's not in Quran. It's all the same. It's all stuff they heard in speeches, and everything from a speech must be somewhere in the Quran. They have that kind of idea, but it's all just chaotic and not really organized in their mind. So this is one way to ground yourself. And you're taking as your guide in this the ulama that you trust. Right? All this is based on the fact that if you are listening to lectures and you're learning from teachers who are trustworthy. Right? Not everyone who gives a lecture on Islamic topics is necessarily trustworthy. Sometimes someone who has less learning, they might quote a verse, but they might quote it in a way that's not really connected to what they're trying to say. Or they explain it in a way that's not very detailed oriented. They're not really paying attention to the words. Then the quote doesn't really mean much to you because it doesn't really connect to anything in a one-to-one sort of a way. You don't understand exactly what it means, exactly what it applies to. I'm talking about good speeches by good ulama who have done good work and you trust them, then their speeches, their lectures are going to be this kind of guide for you. You're already listening to them. This is just a way to connect to the Quran through those speeches and start to memorize these very prominent verses that are mentioned over and over again, and take that as a guide and a hint that this is a verse that's worth committing to memory. Recite salawat ala Muhammad wa alihi. Another tip is that the Quran, you know this if you've read it. First of all, you must, as soon as possible, if you have not already read Quran through, I'm not talking about just Arabic, if you don't understand Arabic, reading it through in Arabic is a kind of ibadah. The tilawah of Quran is a kind of ibadah. But if you haven't read the Quran through in translation that you understand, then that's a big shame. And you have to remedy that as soon as possible. Right? Start immediately. I said this the other day as well. Sometimes, especially as Shia, we have this kind of bravado, where we say we're followers of Ahlul Bayt. We have the best literature. Who has Nahj al-Balagha? Who has something like Sahifa Sajadiyah? And we tell the non-Muslim who has something like the Quran. And we take such pride in these works of literature. But again, don't be the donkey who's just bearing these things, who has it on the shelf, who brags about it, but hasn't actually read it. If you haven't read through Sahifa Sajadiyah, then why are you bragging? And what good is the bragging? If you haven't read through Nahj al-Balagha, this is just a read through, just to read it, cover to cover, just so you know what's there. You've done it once. Now you have some idea, and then you can make a plan to decide how to engage with it more meaningfully. But the first step is just to read it. It's a book. That's the whole thing about books. They have to be read. That's the nature of a book. And so yes, it is a wonderful, I'm not downplaying the fact that they are wonderful legacies that we have been given by Ahlul Bayt. A great gift that we have that. It is a source of pride, yes. But the problem is, if I'm bragging about this, if I'm boasting about the greatness of this treasure, when I myself do not benefit from the treasure, what difference is there between me and that donkey who's bearing those books and has no idea what's in the books? So that has to be remedied. Yeah, as soon as possible, engage with Quran now. It's month of Quran, so engage with Quran. If you haven't read it, pick up a translation, that's good, and read through, and that way you've at least seen it once, and then you can engage more meaningfully later. But one of the challenges that we often encounter when we read Quran is it seems very disorganized. When you do read it cover to cover, when you read a surah through, you feel like it jumps around here to here. It's Musa here, Isa here, fiqh here, aqidah there, all different things. One after the other, you have verses, and it's hard to see the connection. That is the nature of the Quran, and there is some wisdom behind it as well. As you start to engage with it more, you start to see actually that verses are very much connected. Surahs are very much a whole. It's not just a random collection of verses, and he could have just mixed them up and put them in a different surah, and it would have been just the same. A surah is a whole. There's a beginning, there's a main theme, there's an end. And the connections are very much there, but it takes some more reflection. It takes a little bit more patience and work to build a connection. It's not written the way we are used to writing and reading. Now we have, in English for instance, you have connecting words. You have conjugations, this and this and this, therefore this. And you have these words that help you to kind of see the flow of the thoughts. That here are different pieces of evidence, and the conclusion is this. In Arabic, especially in the Quranic Arabic, those words are not always used in the same way that we expect. And we have to be able to kind of think a little creatively and see, and with reflection, then you see connection. And the work of commentators is that they have done this, and they'll try to bring out those connections and the flow so you can see that interconnectedness. So that's on one side. But right now, the practical solution is it's very helpful to engage with the Quran in different ways. So reading it through one time, that's one way to engage with it. Another way that I'd highly recommend, at some point in your life do this, read through the Quran according to Tartibul Nuzul. So we have Tartibul Mushaf, that's the sequence of surahs as they exist in our current Mushaf. Fatiha, then Baqarah, and then basically in decreasing length all the way down to Nas. This is not the order of surahs as they were revealed to Rasulullah. Baqarah was one of the first Medinan surahs. 10 years after the Quran started being revealed in Mecca. It's not the first surah. Many of the short surahs at the end are the Mecca surahs, which were revealed in the beginning. So it's all mixed up in terms of sequence of revelation. The current order doesn't reflect that at all. I'm talking about sequence of surahs, one after the other, the 114 surahs. That sequence is not the way it was revealed, it's the way conventionally it was just organized like that. No problem with the organization, and no problem reading it like that. But I'm saying you can also access reading it in tartibun nuzul, the sequence in which it was revealed. Now we don't know the tartibun nuzul with 100% accuracy, but we have some good idea. There's some ahadith, particularly from Abdullah ibn Abbas, who has recorded the sequence of surahs as they were revealed. And so we have that list. You can access it in books of ulum al-Quran. Typically have Allama Tabatabai has a book that's translated into English called the Quran in Islam. So in that he has, on 2 pages, he has the list of the surahs of the Quran as they were revealed according to our best understanding. And there's some discrepancy in some of the surahs, and maybe this was in place of that, and this was in place of that. But basically, we have a good idea. So what that does, if you read it in that order, now especially if you read it alongside the history of the Prophet, the seerah of the Prophet, and you read through the Prophet's life, or you just think about his life in Mecca, and then as it changes, life in Medina, and you read the Quran in that sequence, all of a sudden you have a very different perspective on the kinds of things being said in the Meccan surahs versus the Medinan surahs. As wars are being engaged in, you see the surahs that are corresponding to that. As different issues are coming up, you see which surahs are engaging with those ideas. So it brings the Quran to life in that historical context of the Prophet's life, and it's it's interesting, but it's also very meaningful. And you connect with the Prophet better, and you connect with the whole dynamic of his movement. As opposed to seeing things in random order, snippets from Mecca and Medina randomly placed, now you see it in some sequence. That's one good project. So reading it in order as it is in the translation is great. Another project is to read it in order of nuzul. Another way to engage with the Quran is thematically. Right? Because the Quran is ordered in such an unusual way, where verses are apparently mixed up. It seems like there's not that good sequence. So if you want to, for instance, read about the Prophet Musa, there's no chapter you can go to and say, oh, this is the chapter of Musa. It's all over the place. Yes, a lot of the stories in Qasas and Taha and A'raf, their chunks are in certain surahs, but it's all over the place. And until you piece all those pieces of the puzzle together, you're not going to get a good picture of the whole story of Musa alayhi salam. And same with other prophets. So a thematic study goes through and draws all those verses on the same theme together and puts them together for you. That this is what the Quran says about this topic. Taking this verse from here, and putting them all together in one place, and now organizing them. So we have books like this. And My God's Emissaries does that for the Prophet stories. But there are other books that do that for other themes in the Quran. I engaged in a study over the past 4 years now of all what are called ayatul ahkam. There's some verses, something like 400 or 500 verses of the Quran that we call legal verses. They're the verses that are the basis for our fiqh. And they're very challenging verses. The verse of wudu, the verses of inheritance, the verses of qisas, the verses of warfare, of zakah and khums and ghanima and fay, and there's so many different verses, and many of these legal verses are very, very challenging. And when you're just reading, it doesn't make much sense, and it's hard to really register what is it talking about, what are the nuances of the verse. So I decided, let me take these and make a study of these verses. So I created a whole course, and I taught this over the last 4 years, and went through all of the verses of the Quran that talk about the laws. And it was wonderful. It was such an amazing, for me also as the one doing the research and engaging, it was very enlightening. In ways I'd never even engaged with these verses before, because oftentimes in our fiqh study in the Hawza, we don't focus on the verse so much, we go straight to ahadith and look at all the ahadith, which are much more detailed and much more kind of comprehensive, and the verse is just kind of there, but it's not engaged with as well. So this was a new experience for me, myself, and then the students also got a new engagement. So these are some ways to engage with the Quran with some creativity, and the outcome is wonderful. You're not just reading it for a thawab and just as a ritual, where you're just reading it in Arabic and you don't know what it's saying. Not just reading it only in translation, but now you're actually engaging with it by looking at the same thing in different ways, slicing it this way, slicing it that way, and through that process, you are building dimensions and dimensions of your understanding for this book, which is really, truly so deep that all these different aspects we're just scratching the surface, but we're slowly getting to some direction where we're now doing tadabbur. We're now reflecting to the best of our capacity, and we're proving to Allah, most of all, that we're not donkeys. That's what we want to do. We want to make sure we don't want to be those donkeys that are just carrying these books and not reading them, not reflecting on them, and not appreciating the blessing of what He's given us. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Qul huwa Allahu ahad, Allahu as-samad, lam yalid wa lam yulad wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. All praises to Allah, who is the Lord of all worlds, who is the creator and the bestower of all blessings. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya Muhammad wa ala ahli baytihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli wa sallim ala Rasulillah wa ala Amir al-Mu'mineen wa ala Fatimata az-Zahra wa ala al-Hasan wal-Husayn وعلى علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والحجة بن الحسن القائم المهدي صلوات الله عليهم أجمعين. Once again, I exhort you all to fear God, to know Him, to recognize that we owe everything to Him. If He's the bestower of all blessings on us, then we are liable for what we have done with every blessing. And He will account for how we used it, whether we were grateful, whether we used it in ways that He was pleased with, whether we squandered it, whether we used it in ways that are displeasing to Him, and He will account for everything. And so our guiding light in our life must be taqwa, so that we are always guided by God's pleasure and always fleeing from God's displeasure. I will end with just another exhortation. So the Quran is a book that is guiding us. It is a light. Allah has given it to us, and we, under all circumstances, want to make sure that we are doing the best that we can to avail ourselves of this blessing. We started, many of you were not here in the beginning, but we started by talking about this parable that God gives for those who have the blessing of the book and fail to use it. He calls them donkeys, who bear a burden on their back and have no clue what they're bearing. And so as we engage with the Quran, this is the starkest kind of reality. We have to make sure that we have that image in our mind, and we are loath to ever think of ourselves as those donkeys who have the book on the shelf and don't even bother reading it, don't even bother engaging with it. He tells us in the verse that if you're not doing tadabbur of the Quran, if you're not reading it and engaging with it, then you are with a sealed heart. These are the two options. If your heart is open, then naturally you would go for this book that is guidance, that is for your best interest, and you would engage with it. If you don't, there's something wrong with your heart, and you still have to work on opening up your heart to receive that. One last point. One of the things that sometimes we as Shia in particular are scared of when we engage with the Quran is we've heard so much about tafsir bil-ra'i. And we're afraid if I say anything about the Quran, if I say this verse means this, or that verse means that, oh, how do I know that's true? Maybe it's false, maybe it's a lie, maybe I'll be slandering God and I'll be saying something false and I'll be guilty of tafsir bil-ra'i. Tafsir bil-ra'i is at its own place, that is true. what we should not be afraid of doing is engaging with the book and understanding what we can from the book. And even paraphrasing and saying, this is what I understand from the book. Here's the verse, I've read it, I've thought about it, I think this is what it's saying. How can Allah, where in that proposition can Allah say, you did tafsir bil ra'i, you imposed something on the book that I didn't say? All I'm saying is this is what I've understood from it. That's the minimum that we should do when we're reading a book. If you put yourself in the shoes of anyone who's not Muslim, if they were to see how we engage with the Quran, it would be quite laughable. Because here you have a book, but the whole reason that you have a book is to read it and to understand it. But the Muslims sometimes just read it just to read it, and that's the end of it. We're supposed to read it to understand it and to draw conclusions from it, to say, this is what I think the verse is saying, this is what God is saying in this verse. The way to avoid any sort of imposition on the Quran is to have the idea in your mind that this is my provisional understanding of the verse until I'm proven otherwise. What I've understood so far is such and such, and I'm going to keep engaging. If someone has a better understanding, if they can criticize my understanding and show me something more truthful and more connected to the verse, I'll renounce what I said and I'll take on the new truth. This is not tafsir bil ra'i. This is not imposing anything on the Quran. This is just what it means to engage with a book and understand from it, which is exactly what we should be doing. So we shouldn't be afraid. Oftentimes I get this dynamic that people are afraid to even say that the Quran says this. They first have to ask, is it okay to say this? Is the Quran, what is the opinion of this verse? Before even engaging and offering your own idea that, is it saying this? Could it be saying this? This is what I understand. Is it true or not true? That should be the way we engage with it. And then, yes, someone who knows more can say, oh no, look at this and look at that, and actually you missed this part or you misunderstood that, and this is what it's actually saying. And then you're engaging with it. This is the whole idea of exchanging ideas. You have a hypothesis, it's disproven, you create a new hypothesis, there's evidence for it, and you come to a stronger conclusion. Perfectly reasonable, there's nothing improper about that methodology, and this is what it means to read a book and to benefit from it. Yeah, so just because we're Shia and we know we have authorities in the Imam and in the Prophet who know the Quran, doesn't mean that we are now paralyzed and we can't also engage and understand from the Quran. It is a book that is addressing us, and we can benefit from it. Alhamdulillah, we have their benefit as well. They also tell us many things. And then their students who are our ulama, they also help us to understand the Quran. But all these are trying to work towards the same thing, which is that we should all be engaging with the Quran and understanding from it. And then always improving our understanding. Today I understand this from the verse. Tomorrow I hear something, I engage in a discussion with someone more knowledgeable. They correct my understanding. I change my understanding of the verse to something new because that's better. What I thought was mistaken, I made a mistake there. Here's something better, so now I've improved it. And it's a constant process. It doesn't stop. I've been engaging with the Quran for just a couple of decades, and I'm still on a daily basis updating, improving, scratching things, replacing with new ideas. And I'm sure if you talk to, even Ayatul Jawadi in his 90s, who's engaged, he's probably still constantly coming up with new ideas and engaging in new ways with the Quran. This is a constant well of wisdom. Allah, we ask you to shower your blessings and mercy on the Prophet and the family of Muhammad. Allahumma aghfir lil mu'minina wal mu'minat wal muslimina wal muslimat al ahya'i minhum wal amwat. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Inna a'tainaka al kawthar fasalli li rabbika wanhar. Inna shani'aka huwal abtar.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله